Hi, and thank you for joining us. I'm excited to be here today talking with two of our 24 contributing authors of the third book in the Changing Work Collective book series. The book is called Are We Friends or Coworkers? Exploring Relationships at Work, and it's scheduled to release on May 30th, 2025. My name is Rachel Radway, and I'm an executive and leadership coach for high achieving, highly sensitive, and neurodivergent women. I'm also a volunteer host and member of changingwork.org and a contributing author of the second book of the Changing Work Collective series, the Amazon bestseller Leading with Compassion, Cultivating Connection from the Inside Out, also available on bookshop.org. For those who aren't familiar with the Changing Work Collective, we're an online community of humans committed to conscious business practices and changing work from the inside out. I'm here today with Keisha Whaley, author of Chapter 1 of the new book, Dropping My Sword, and Wendy McHenry, author of Chapter 20, Transforming Isolation into Connection, a Practitioner's Guide. Thank you both for being here today. So let's start with introductions. Keisha, your chapter comes first, so we'll start with you. Welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to write your chapter in Are We Friends or Coworkers?
Yeah, thank you for having me as a part of this. It's the whole process has been amazing. So a little bit about me. I am in Dallas and started my career in graphic design that led me through to creative direction and ultimately to starting my own company, a first of its kind teaching agency, if you will, where people come to get trained to start their careers in advertising and marketing. And that journey and all of its ebbs and flows kind of led me to write in my chapter because I approached it in a very different way than I think a lot of other people that have a business background might. So coming at my whole career and perspective from a creative lens, and then entering into the business world in such a way is what's behind me and really what's in front of me.
Love it. Thank you. And you actually touched on something that I'm going to come back to and ask you about a little bit later. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Yes.
Wendy, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to write your chapter.
Thank you so much for having me here. I was so excited to come back and return for book three. I was an author in book one and had such a good experience, but partially because for book three, the topic of Are We Friends or Coworkers? Creating community at work is something I'm so passionate about. It was like a light bulb moment for me that went off. I work in tech. In my last role, I led a solutions engineering business unit, and in solutions engineering, only 18% of us identify as women globally, and that number has been not changing over many, many years. So there's a lot of opportunity to support women in that role and to help them grow their careers and stay in that career for a long time. So I got involved in ERGs, employee resource groups, which is dedicated to supporting marginalized talent and supporting them and helping them grow their careers and be successful in the tech space. And so for me, I was super excited to come back. Also, Keisha, you mentioned something about the creative space. And I just wanted to say for me, something I so enjoy about this group of authors is it is my chance to be with other creative people. And that's very different than my day-to-day role in tech, right? So it's been really fun to be a part of that creative process and really stretch it, explore it, and use that side of my brain, frankly.
Yeah.
I was going to save this for a little bit later, but actually, Wendy, since you just brought it up, why don't we switch gears a little bit and talk about what the process was like writing as one of 24 authors for this book
Yeah.
and how, what that creative process looked like for you. Wendy, do you want to start since you brought
Sure,
it?
I can start. Um, so for me, first of all, I really have enjoyed getting to know the other authors and learning about their experiences and their creative process. For me, it was a reminder to get back into a daily writing habit, which is something that has ebbed and flowed throughout my life. And I had a coach once told me he would just sit down and write, like 20 minutes a day. It doesn't matter if you're like repeating yourself, just sit down and build that habit. And for me, being able to have a community of authors and the sub cohort of authors, right, that to bounce ideas off of and to help each other through the drafting process to get ideas and hear how it's being perceived was also very helpful for me and like to see a different point of view on what I was thinking was also really helpful. So you can see that in the iterations of my drafts as we went through the process.
Very cool. And you sort of knew what you were getting into because you had been a participant in book one as
I
well.
did.
I'm curious, was the experience different? Was it similar? I know obviously different group of authors.
It was similar, but what made it different was the people and their experiences, right? So and that was something that I was looking forward to, was being with a different group of authors and getting different perspectives. So I obviously really enjoyed the process. That's why I came back.
Love it. Keisha, how about you? What was it like being part of this cohort of authors?
So I think being a part of the cohort was the part that was the most structured for me. I'm quite neurodivergent myself. Am currently going through assessments to figure out what all is at play here besides ADHD, which I'm very aware of. That ADHD means that my creative process is less of a process than a fit or a tantrum in one realm or something very flowy. But I don't tend to have much. I don't have much ability to kind of set my own routine and practice. And when someone says something like write every day, then I go, oh, that sounds awful. But having the community there, we had a weekly check-in, and that was something that even if I hadn't had the opportunity to write in between, there was some regularity and coming to the kind of virtual table to talk about the writing and topics and questions or challenges or something that kind of brought in a regularity that allowed me to get into the flow that I then kind of used to write the initial draft. And once that was done, then I kind of changed gears into a sort of an editing place. And I think my work as a designer definitely plays in this. When you're coming up with those initial concepts, it sort of just comes out how it comes out. But once you get into the refinement phase, you can do that kind of on a schedule. And so that was much easier to build in a framework. But I kind of credit the my pod group, my writing group, for building in that initial structure that allowed that to come together.
Interesting. I can relate on so many levels to both of you. I also am neurodivergent, and sticking with any kind of routine is really difficult for me.
Yeah.
Unlike you, rather, I come from a creative background, but it's writing and not editing. And the problem for me is, sorry, writing and not designing.
Yeah.
And the problem for me is that I actually am also a trained editor. So when I write, I'm constantly editing myself. So it's a
Yeah.
very different process. So, um, Keisha, let's go back to you.
Okay.
When you first learned about the book project and the theme, Are We Friends or Coworkers? What came to mind immediately for you?
I had this. I don't tend to, claim imposter syndrome much in my life, but I think that that is what was going on because when I first saw, the call for authors, would you like to contribute to this book and the topic, I immediately felt a desire to explore it because I definitely have, I'm very much a people pleaser, nurturer, heavy mom energy, even though I don't have any children. I so I immediately was like, yeah, I have a really hard time differentiating in relationships, and it's not just friends. It's we go straight to family. We have merged souls. You're part of my being, that kind of a thing. And so I was like, I have something to say here, and to kind of tell a story that might be pretty painful and almost seen as vulnerable to share, but I wanted to share it. But as soon as I had that thought, I told myself, no, 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 back away from this. You shouldn't, you can't, you wouldn't, other people have other story. They're probably looking, for something else. It was just all of these kind of swirling thoughts. And what I'm the most glad for is that I felt comfortable enough with some of the community members that really introduced me to changing work in the beginning, Tim Van Ness and others that I was willing to share with, just my thought spiral. And they said, you know what, just see, because I actually do think there's something for you to say. And maybe, the feelings that you're having are not all that uncommon from feelings that we've had, in that process. And so, um, yeah, it was kind of this big swell of different things right from the beginning. And it actually took several weeks, and it was kind of last call. And I sent a really timid message out to Scott and to Amy asking if I could contribute, and that's what kind of started that ball rolling. And they were so welcoming, so very welcoming.
I love that you did it and that you were able to talk with Tim and some of the others and get that feedback.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I have talked with other authors, and you're not the only one who's had those feelings. There are a number of people who said, I waited till the last possible second. I felt imposter syndrome. I wasn't sure, what made my voice special.
Mhm.
Um, and you really did. Um, I felt immediately when I was reading your chapter how courageous you were in putting this out there. It was very vulnerable, and you really do have a message. And I think that it's going to resonate with a lot of your readers. So
Thank
I'm
you.
glad you did that. I want to dive a little bit deeper into something that you said. So there was a section that stood out to me that talks about exactly what you just mentioned, which was, well, a different part of what you just mentioned. You
Mhm.
wrote that the work environment I'd built was much more like a home than an office, and my team were my children, or at least that's how I saw them. And then a
Mhm.
little bit later, you wrote, I referred to them as my kids. They affectionately called me mom, which is where, as you reflect later, some of the trouble started. So
Yeah.
I'm curious about where this choice came from. Was it conscious? And was it a reaction to any work environments that you'd experienced before you started your business? Or maybe something
Yeah.
completely different?
Yeah, so I had been through, by this point, I'd worked at a couple of different agency environment type of places. So advertising agency, not quite Mad Men, but but something there. It's a very masculine energy, very big business, and really driving people forward by a dash of fear and a little bit of just, we've got to be the best kind of a thing. And I don't respond well to that myself. So part of it was a like a counter reaction to what I'd been through. But the other part of it was my mom is a midwife and has run her own midwifery clinic since I was 2 years old. That's when she started, training and going out on her own. And so I grew up with that, and the way that she spoke with families and, handled high pressure situations that are actual high pressure and not, can we get this campaign launched on time? And so I was like, okay, that is how I want to be when I'm working with people who are in a learning capacity. All of my apprentices were in a vulnerable position to be in a learning capacity and be in their job at the same time. And I wanted them to know that they were safe. They were safe to make mistakes. They were safe to express when they were, hitting a limitation or in stress or whatever. And I wanted my clients to know that I would keep them safe as well, knowing that there was going to be someone less experienced doing the work, but I was going to oversee it. And so that's really where that came into play. And I tell people all the time, my client voice, the voice that I take on when I speak to my clients, it comes straight from my mom. And there's a little like neurolinguistic programming going on, and but yeah, so it was very much a reaction or a response to what I had been through and trying to make it different, and then pulling from something that felt really safe and warm and comforting and saying, okay, that can live here. And I did it without guardrails. I did it without boundaries. And that was kind of the problem.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. Um, it gives the chapter more depth and more context hearing that background.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate it. And I think it really is going to mean a lot to your readers.
Thank you.
So
I hope
thank
so.
you. Wendy, turning back to you. So you talked about first of all, the incredibly low percentage of people who identify as women who are in uh, your field. And that was one of the things that came to mind when you first heard the theme of the book. Anything else that came to mind for you, and what made you know that you wanted to write about this topic?
So originally we were thinking the theme of the book would be around building community at work. And that is sort of all what I'm about, right? That is actually my favorite part of my job, and what I have dedicated the last 6 years of my life to doing. And so deeply, deeply passionate about it, especially through the pandemic and seeing what people were really craving connection. Like after the pandemic, that was really like what people craving. Like if you think about that deep soul level need to feel connected to another human being and just feel so deeply about the power that connection can bring. And so to me, I just felt like this aligned so nicely with who I am as not only as a leader, but as a person, right? So for me, it was just it just I this is what I feel so strongly about. This is what I had put forth was building these employee resource groups. I have seen the power of those groups again and again and again. I have coached other C-suite executives on how to build them in their organization. I've seen them grow, and I'm in the midst of doing it again in a different way. I joined the board of Carolina Women in Tech, and we're trying to grow that presence in the Raleigh area. And so again, I'm doing it again because again, it's such a powerful thing to feel connected and seen and heard and supported by another human. It is a deep psychological need for us.
It absolutely is. And your passion for that community shines through in your words in the chapter.
Good.
There was a section that stood out to me. You wrote, "So how did I feel so lonely when I was in a cubicle environment, physically near my coworkers, yet so connected to my coworkers in another job, even though we were spread across
Right.
the globe?" The answer lies in how organizations purposefully create opportunities for connection and cultivate an environment that supports building authentic connections at work. And then you go on after that to talk about employee resource groups and all the benefits that they bring to both members and to the organizations. And I'm curious, what made you talk a little bit about the organization that you were in first, that you start the chapter with as like the Apple TV show Severance. What made the new organization that you joined after that cubicle farm different enough that you and the other co-founders came up with the idea to start an ERG? Why couldn't something like that have happened at the cubicle farm?
So when I joined that new company, I had been there maybe a month when we went to an in-person meeting, like management meeting. And it was like I couldn't help myself. I kept standing up and I was like, and another thing, and another. And I pointed out in my interview, I interviewed with 22 people, and only one of them was a woman. And
Wow.
I tried to explain what my experience was like, but it was because I was being heard. And I had people come up to me afterwards and say, "I'm so sorry. I never realized, I never thought about it that way." And so just the support was there from day one, right? That they were open to this idea, that they were open to understanding that there was a better way, that there was more we could be doing. And so I was the first woman manager to be hired. And then within a year and a half, we had 123 women in this ERG. So
Wow.
and now there's many more women. In fact, the person that leads that entire organization now is a woman, which I love. But it started with, I looked around and I was like, why am I the only woman here? Like, that's not okay. But it was an environment where they were open, is what I would really say.
And it sounds like the first place was not.
Correct. The first place was very, and I think this is, typical, right? Very revenue driven. It was very much make sure you're doing your work, so you're pushing all the buttons and getting the work done, and it's the revenue is what's important.
I could definitely relate. I found myself as you were describing that opening scene, I could absolutely see it and relate to it, no question. Um, okay, switching gears again. I am always fascinated by how different authors in collaborative books end up providing so many different perspectives on one single theme. And you alluded to this earlier, I think, Wendy. Um, I'm curious what might have resonated with either of you about the other's chapter.
Mm. There were some really interesting things that came just from the few chapters in my pod group, things that kind of turned something on its head. Claire is part of my group, and her chapter talked about her she's very much the opposite of me, very much an introvert, an internal processor, all of that. And reading through hers, she mentions at some point, find she talks about a person that she worked with that was very much the extrovert, the outgoing one, the one that kind of pulled her into social situations and allowed her to open, those doors to having coworkers be friends. And she says, find that person for you. And I'm reading it and I'm going, oh, I can think of all of the introverts that I just sort of sat right next to and was like, is it your first day? Hi, and pulled them into it. And so it was interesting. I've read so many things that I feel like directly reflect me in some way or, call to mind something. This was the first time that I got a chance to see the other side of things in a way that was just as deeply explored and found how we all kind of show up to each other in each other's lives. That was really, really interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wendy,
I
how
think
about
that's a
you?
beautiful way to phrase it, Keisha, because honestly, your experience you described, I was very similar when I was first leading teams, right? And it took me a while to understand that. And especially when I was first running into performance situations, having to pull in HR, that was very, very difficult for me. Frankly,
Yeah.
I still don't enjoy that part of the role, right? It's still very difficult because I'm a firm believer in coaching and career development, and that's really how I lead. But the first times I was running into those issues really is where I was like, oh no, I'm really in over my head. So I think, I love what you said, seeing yourself reflected, right? That's something I so enjoy about meeting everyone at Changing Work.
Mhm.
Did you have any thoughts, Wendy, about any of the other chapters that you've read or?
Oh gosh, I think Keisha's resonated a lot with me. And oh my goodness.
That's okay. Don't want to put you on the spot here. Okay. So, from a process perspective, what would you each say was the biggest learning for you from going through this? You've talked about, your feelings a little bit getting into it.
Mhm.
Uh, Looking back now that the book is going to be out in a few weeks,
Yeah.
what have you learned from the process?
I, I think for me, Lisa's advice on the first draft feedback, I had a lot of red lines. And she found, Wendy, you need to trust yourself and your own wisdom and your own experiences. You are also an expert in this. And just I wrote that down on a post-it, that trust yourself. I thought that was very, very wise. And certainly through this process, I've learned Lisa's an incredible editor. Yes. But I thought that was great advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Keisha, what
I
about you?
so I my experience writing, besides what I would need to write in a kind of creative environment, and backing up logo concepts, things like that. A lot of my writing comes from, high school or college experiences for classes, and it was um, I've kind of learned that the way that I write now, without a teacher, without a professor, overseeing it and asking, for something specific, I write not like I talk conversationally, but as spoken dialogue. Um, and so I was writing, I would, type something out and I would type several paragraphs or pages and then I'd go back and read it out loud. And that's how I could experience how it flowed and make edits there. Um, I would read it to other people out loud and get their, response and reaction to it. And so I did that so much, that once I came to like turn in my edit to Lisa for the first draft, I was so nervous that she was going to come back and say, "We asked for AP style. Like, what is this prose poetry? Like, what is this?" That some sort of beat, Def Jam kind of thing. But no, it was actually she really loved it, and the way that I kind of work with narrative, or the way that I even, some of it kind of feel almost essay, but so I guess what I learned the most, that I was a little shocked by, is that even with a framework like a style that you need to, work within, and here's how you indent, and here's how, things need to be underlined versus italicized, things like that, that there's still a lot of freedom to voice and freedom of writing style, in a personal way. And I was really glad to see that, because that was the thing that intimidated me the most out of writing at the beginning, to get started. I was just so much like, oh, I don't, it's been so long, and I haven't done expository writing, and so I was really, really glad to see that, and it unlocked a love for writing that I didn't know that I had, and I've continued to write, still in fits and tantrums, but I've continued to write since.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. And because you said that, Wendy, I'm curious, are you still doing your daily writing practice?
I'm trying to. So I tend to write more like journal style right now. Although I have an expansive time coming up where I'm hoping I can do more creative writing again. So it gets, I love what you said, the fits and tantrums. Like I feel like that it's the ebb and flow. So for me, I'm kind of like in a more journalistic style right now.
I hear that. And Keisha, to what you were saying about the ways that the different about the freedom for the different voices to come out. That's one of the things that I love about reading these books is it is one theme, and you don't really know what to expect going into it. But when you read the different chapters, they are all so different, and they come from such different perspectives, and the
Yeah.
voices are so different. And there is a huge amount of freedom within this topic and the framework of the book. So
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. So what advice would you have for someone who is considering becoming an author? They're sort of thinking about putting their hat in the ring and haven't tried it yet. I know that Changing Work has a number of books that they are still planning on coming out with, and there's a lot of opportunity for people to have their voices heard.
Yeah.
Honestly, I started this writing style on LinkedIn. Just getting out there. One way to do it is by, if you see another post that is inspiring to you, don't just repost it with your own thoughts. Start there and then eventually move up to writing your own posts. And then from there, like that's how I did it. And then I moved from there to blogs and then to the book. So that was my path that worked for me.
Okay. And it sounds like it worked well. Keisha, how about you? What would you
I
recommend?
love that. Where my mind went was kind of that, one, I hope that people listening and watching here are taking in that we can all kind of have those moments of, oh, it shouldn't be me, not my story, not my voice, whatever. One of the things that has kind of propelled me forward in continuing to write is knowing that there's lots out there. Of course, there's lots out there, but every time someone shares an experience in any capacity, someone else listening will always say, "Thank you for sharing that. I needed to hear that." Or that happened to me. It opens a dialogue, it opens a conversation. It helps people not to feel so lonely and isolated in their own experience. When we confront a challenge, our first impulse is to feel like I'm the only one that this has ever happened to, and there's no way out from here. So I hope that whatever the topics are for the next books, if you feel compelled to write, positive story, not so positive story, whatever it is, that you know that whatever it is that you have to say and however it is that you have to say it, someone needs to hear it from you.
Beautifully put. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up, I would love for you both to tell listeners how they can find you, follow you, learn more about you, engage with you. Keisha, let's start with you.
Okay. So I mentioned I have ADHD. I'm not a great consistent social media anybody, but LinkedIn is probably the place where I'm the easiest to find. And I'm just on LinkedIn as Keisha Whaley. I think it's probably Keisha_Whaley if you go directly to my page. But I'm also on Instagram. My handle is at to the nitty, NITTY, like nitty gritty. So that's me. And I actually I like when people reach out. I like when they want to chat about things. And so yeah, if anybody's interested in connecting there, then just send me a note and let me know what you're up to.
Terrific. And Wendy, how about you?
For me, my handle is Wendy Mac 98. That's the same handle on LinkedIn and Instagram. LinkedIn, I'm posting more about tech things and women in tech initiatives. And then my Instagram is more, well, probably also some women in tech things, but maybe a little more hard hitting on the perspectives there. But yeah, I would absolutely love. And honestly, something else I have done since the tech industry restructuring that began January of 2023, I've been doing career coaching for free for anyone who's been impacted. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat and make time.
That's
That's,
excellent.
that's awesome. Thank you both.
Mhm.
And thank you for sharing your insights today. They were incredibly valuable, and for your powerful contributions to book 3, Are We Friends or Coworkers? Exploring Relationships at Work, which again launches on May 30th, 2025. For listeners and watchers of this conversation, if you've enjoyed it, we invite you to explore our first 2 best-selling books. Leading with Self-Awareness, Starting from the Inside Out was book 1, and book 2, Leading with Compassion, Cultivating Connection from the Inside Out, both available on bookshop.org and on Amazon. And if this conversation sparked something meaningful for you, please consider sharing it with your network or your community. And if you'd like to connect with others on the journey to create more conscious, human-centered workplaces, we invite you to learn more about our growing community at changingwork.org. Thank you for being part of the movement to change work from the inside out, and have a wonderful day.